Numbers don't lie. That's the first principle you learn in accounting. They are the purest form of truth. A ledger balances or it doesn't. A profit is real or it isn't. People lie. Egos lie. Ambition lies, but the numbers always tell the story. For 6 years at Sterling Holdings, a private equity firm that acted like royalty, I was the keeper of those numbers. My job was to make sure the story they told was true. Their job, as I was about to find out, was to write fiction and force me to call it fact. The lie that broke me wasn't a small one. It wasn't a fudged expense report or a padded invoice. It was a 9-figure monster. The scene was the annual shareholder meeting, a lavish affair held in the grand ballroom of a hotel that cost more per night than my first car. Richard Sterling, our founder and CEO, a man who wore charisma like a custom-tailored suit, was on stage, presenting the end-of-year financials. The slides behind him projected graphs soaring upwards like eagles. Record profits. Unprecedented growth, a 30% dividend for our shareholders. The room, filled with wealthy investors and industry sharks, was practically purring. I stood at the back, next to the audiovisual technician, my stomach a cold, tight knot, because I knew the truth. Those soaring graphs were a mirage. The profits weren't just inflated, they were imaginary, conjured from a black hole in the books I had been ordered to ignore. The 30% dividend wasn't being paid from profits. It was being paid for with a secret, high-interest loan that was mortgaging the company's future. Richard Sterling concluded his speech to a thunderous standing ovation. My direct boss, Mark Adler, the CFO, caught my eye from the front row. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, a chilling gesture of shared conspiracy. A gesture that said, "You did your part. You kept your mouth shut. Now watch us get praised for it." That's when it happened. An elderly shareholder, a man named Mr. Abernathy who had been with the firm since the beginning, stood up. He wasn't cheering. "Richard," he called out, his voice quavering but clear. "This all looks wonderful, but my own accountants are flagging some irregularities in the quarterly statements, specifically regarding the debt-to-asset ratio of the new Orion acquisition. Can you elaborate on how that was structured?" A hush fell over the room. The Orion acquisition was the heart of the fraud. It was a shell company we'd acquired at an insanely inflated value to hide our losses. Richard didn't even blink. He smiled warmly. "An excellent, detailed question, David. That's why we love our legacy partners. For that level of technical detail, I'll turn to my CFO, Mark Adler, and the architect of our financial strategy, the woman who makes it all balance, Celia." He pointed, directly at me, in the back of the room. 100 pairs of wealthy, expectant eyes swiveled in my direction. Mark was staring at me, his expression a mixture of panic and command. The message was clear. Lie for us now. Time seemed to slow down. I was the backroom girl, the silent number cruncher. I wasn't supposed to be seen, let alone speak. I was just supposed to make the numbers fit the story. In that moment, staring into the abyss of 100 faces, I felt a strange calm. It was the icy clarity that comes just before a terrible, necessary decision. I could either become a part of the lie forever, or I could become the single, inconvenient truth that would bring the whole rotten structure down. I opened my mouth and spoke, my voice steady. "Mr. Abernathy, you are right to question the structure. A full explanation of the Orion acquisition would require a detailed look at ledgers not presented here today." It was a perfectly crafted non-answer. It was technically true but said nothing incriminating, but it wasn't the lie they wanted. Richard Sterling's smile tightened at the edges. Mark's face went white. I hadn't played my part. I hadn't endorsed the fiction. In their world, a refusal to lie was the same as an act of treason. That night, I didn't go home. I went back to the office and was told Richard wanted to see me. When I walked into his office, he and Mark were waiting. The warmth was gone. There was only ice. "What was that, Celia?" Richard asked, his voice dangerously soft. "We had a script. You had one line. The Orion acquisition was structured for optimal tax efficiency and long-term growth. That's it." "The numbers don't support that statement," I said quietly. Mark slammed his hand on the desk. "Your job isn't to support the statements. Your job is to prepare the statements we give you. For 6 years, you've understood that. What changed?" I looked at them both. At these two men who saw the law and the truth as inconvenient obstacles to their wealth, and I realized what had changed. Me. That was the night I stopped being an accountant and started planning a forensic audit. My own. My target wasn't Jew. Sent to expose them. It was to reclaim the truth of the numbers they had twisted and to build a fortress of fact they could never escape. My plan had a name, Project Veridian. It's a stable, permanent pigment that's impossible to erase, just like the truth I was about to put on the record. But before I detail the anatomy of my counterfraud, let me properly introduce myself. I am Celia Reyes. I was 32 when this happened. I was the chief controller at Sterling Holdings, which is a fancy title for the person who knows where every single dollar is buried. And they had just handed me a shovel. If you've ever been asked to compromise your principles for a paycheck or bend the truth for someone else's gain, hit that like button and subscribe. Because this is a story for everyone who believes that facts are stubborn things. And I'm about to show you just how stubborn they can be. Back to that night in Richard's office. I didn't get fired. That would have been too suspicious. Instead, I was given a chilling warning. "You are on thin ice, Celia," Richard had said. "From now on, I want a daily report of your activities. Every document you access, every spreadsheet you touch. We value your meticulous nature. Don't give us a reason not to." It was a leash. They thought they were containing me, but a leash works both ways. They had just given me a pretext to access everything under the guise of daily reporting. My plan began to take shape that very night. Phase 1, the double ledger. My first move was to create a parallel universe. I was the only one with full admin access to the company's new, state-of-the-art accounting software. I used that access to create a sandboxed, shadow partition within the system itself, a hidden set of books that was completely invisible to anyone without my specific credentials. Every night, a silent script I wrote would run, making a perfect, immutable copy of the day's true transactions, and saving them to my shadow ledger before any of the creative accounting was applied by Mark's team. I was building a pristine, untouchable copy of reality. Phase 2, the paper trail. A digital ledger is one thing, but I needed physical proof. I used my new daily reporting mandate as an excuse to go deep into the company's physical archives in the basement. I was looking for the paper trail for every fraudulent deal, especially the Orion acquisition. Signed contracts, loan agreements, internal memos. I spent my nights scanning every document onto encrypted hard drives I'd bought with cash. I was looking for the one thing that always brings down financial criminals, a signature on the wrong piece of paper. I found it in the Orion loan agreement, a personal guarantee from Richard Sterling himself, using his personal assets as collateral. A fact I was sure the other shareholders didn't know. Phase 3, the vault. I needed an exit strategy and a way to protect the data. I started my own company on paper, Reyes Financial Forensics. I rented a small, secure server in a data center in a different state. It would be my digital vault, the final destination for my shadow ledger and the scanned documents. More importantly, I started communicating with a man I'll call the Arbiter. He was a retired, famously feared SEC enforcement lawyer my law school professor uncle had put me in touch with. I told him, hypothetically, about a company with massive fraud. I didn't name names. He gave me advice, not legal advice, but practical advice. He told me, evidence is useless if it's not admissible. Build a perfect, unbroken chain of custody, and don't come forward until the lie is too big for them to survive its collapse. I gave myself 3 months to build the perfect case. My days became a blur of quiet, meticulous work. I performed my duties flawlessly. I sent Mark and Richard my daily reports, which were sanitized lists of my activities. They thought I was compliant. They thought I was scared. They had no idea that with every report I filed, I was also smuggling terabytes of data to my personal drives. The stress was immense. I was living a double life. A junior accountant named Ben, a bright kid who sat near me, sometimes noticed how late I stayed. "Working hard, Celia?" he'd ask. "The end-of-quarter numbers must be a beast." "Something like that," I'd reply, forcing a smile, while a script was silently copying evidence of felony fraud in the background. Then, about 2 months in, they escalated their game. They were preparing for another huge deception, a merger with a struggling but publicly traded tech company. This would allow them to use the public company's stock to hide even more of their debt and cash out their fictitious gains. The deal was built on the same foundation of lies as everything else. But this time, It involved the public markets. This was a federal crime of a whole different magnitude. And they needed my signature on the due diligence reports. Mark Cal led me into his office. Celia, he said, sliding a thick document across the desk. This is the final due diligence package for the merger. We need you to sign off on the financials. Richard is announcing the deal on Friday. I looked at the signature page. My name was typed neatly at the bottom. To sign, it would be to chain myself to their crime forever. To refuse would be to declare war, right there and then, before my plan was complete. I need to review the source documents for every asset listed here, I said, my voice betraying no emotion. That's my standard procedure. Mark's jaw tightened. There's no time, Celia. The deal is on a fast track. We've already vetted the numbers. Just sign it. Consider it a test of your loyalty. Richard is watching this very closely. Then he will see me doing my job properly, I replied. I picked up the document. I'll have it back to you by Friday morning after I complete my review. He didn't have a choice but to agree. To refuse me the right to review the documents would be an admission of guilt in itself. I walked out of his office with the merger package. I had just been handed the bomb, and the timer was ticking. I had less than 48 hours to complete Project Veridian. And this is where the story gets really interesting. This is the moment when all the planning, all the late nights, all the risk, it all comes down to a single point in time. It's the moment the accountant becomes the executioner. And before I tell you exactly what happened in those next 48 hours and how they reacted when they realized the trap I had laid, I need to just take a breath. Because even thinking about it now, the adrenaline, the fear, the sheer, cold clarity of it, it still feels like it was yesterday. Okay, I had the merger documents and a 48-hour deadline. The war had begun. That night, I didn't go home. I locked my office door, drew the blinds, and got to work. My first step was to compare their fraudulent merger documents with my pristine shadow ledger. The discrepancies were, as I expected, massive. They had valued the tech company's intellectual property at $200 million. My analysis of their actual cash flow and market position showed it was worth, optimistically, about $15 million. The entire deal was a house of cards. My next step was to prepare my own report. I used their exact formatting, their logos, their font. But my report contained only the truth. It was a forensic audit of the proposed merger, backed by every piece of data from my shadow ledger. On the final page, instead of a summary of synergistic opportunities, I wrote a single, damning sentence. Based on this analysis, the proposed merger is financially unsound, predicated on material misrepresentations, and exposes Sterling Holdings and its shareholders to catastrophic risk. Then came the final piece. The delivery system. I knew simply confronting them would do nothing. They would shred the report and fire me. I needed to create a situation they couldn't escape. I needed witnesses. At 4 a.m., I sent an email to the arbiter, the retired SEC lawyer. I told him the time had come. I attached a password-protected, encrypted copy of my entire Veridian file, the shadow ledger, the scanned documents, my forensic report. I told him the password would be sent in a separate communication if and when he needed it. I now had a secure, independent third party holding a perfect copy of my entire case. My insurance policy. At 7 a.m., I made my move. Sterling Holdings had an internal, company-wide notification system used for urgent announcements. It sent an email and a text message to all 200 employees, from the CEO down to the interns. My high-level admin privileges gave me access to it. I scheduled a single message to be sent at exactly 9:05 a.m. At 8:45 a.m., I walked into the main boardroom where the weekly senior management meeting was about to begin. Richard, Mark, and all the department heads were there. I was holding two identical-looking bound documents. Celia, Richard said, surprised and annoyed to see me. What is this? I'm busy. I've completed my review of the merger, I said, my voice ringing with calm authority. I placed one copy of my report in front of him. And I've taken the liberty of preparing a copy for each member of the senior management team so we can all be aligned on the findings. I began walking around the table, placing a report in front of each executive. They stared at me, then at the document, confused. Mark grabbed his copy and flipped to the last page. I watched the blood drain from his face as he read my concluding sentence. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling with rage. Richard snatched his own copy and read the final page. His face turned a deep, blotchy red. "You're fired," he hissed. "Security." But it was too late. It was 9:05 a.m. At that exact moment, every phone in the room buzzed simultaneously. The company-wide notification I had scheduled was sent. The other executives looked down at their phones. The message on their screens read, "Urgent, an emergency meeting of all shareholders has been called for 10:00 a.m. today via secure video link. The topic is a critical review of the proposed merger, based on a forensic audit by Chief Controller Celia. A copy of this audit will be distributed during the call. The link to the meeting will be sent shortly." The boardroom descended into absolute chaos. I hadn't just brought a report. I had called the fire department, the police, and every news station in the city and told them the building was burning. Richard was shouting, ordering it to retract the message, but it was impossible. Mark was on his phone, probably calling his lawyer. I stood in the center of the storm I had created, and I said one last thing. The company's bylaws state that a senior officer can call an emergency shareholder meeting if they have reason to believe the company is at material risk. I believe I have met that requirement. I looked directly at Richard. The original, signed copies of every document supporting my audit are in a secure, off-site location. Any attempt to destroy company records or to retaliate against me will be unwise. I turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving them in the ruins of their own greed. The next few hours were the most intense of my life. My corporate email and system access were instantly shut down, but it didn't matter. I went to a small coffee shop nearby, ordered a black coffee, and opened my personal laptop. I sent 2 more emails. The first was to the shareholders with the secure link for the 10:00 a.m. meeting, as promised. The second was to the arbiter. The email contained a single word, the password for the evidence file. The shareholder meeting was a bloodbath. I wasn't on the call, but I got a minute-by-minute account from Ben, the junior accountant, who texted me in a state of shock and awe. The shareholders, led by Mr. Abernathy, were furious. Faced with my undeniable forensic report, Richard and Mark's defense crumbled. By noon, the board of directors had suspended Richard and Mark, pending an internal investigation. By 3:00 p.m., the internal investigation became an official one, after the arbiter made a single phone call and hand-delivered my pristine evidence package to his old friends at the SEC. By the end of the day, federal agents were walking into the Sterling Holdings offices with warrants. It was over. Today, 2 years later, Sterling Holdings is a shadow of its former self. It was forced into bankruptcy protection. Richard and Mark are currently awaiting sentencing after pleading guilty to securities fraud and a laundry list of other charges. They lost everything: their company, their wealth, their freedom. And me, Ray's Financial Forensics, is now one of the most sought-after forensic accounting firms in the country. Our clients are companies that have been victims of fraud or boards that want to ensure they never will be. My first client, fittingly, was the new court-appointed board of Sterling Holdings, who hired me to clean up the mess and help recover assets for the shareholders. They paid my firm a fee that was more than I would have earned in a lifetime at my old job. Ben, the junior accountant, was my first hire. Turns out, he has a brilliant mind for finding the truth in the numbers. My ultimate revenge wasn't seeing Richard and Mark fall. The real revenge was in the restoration of order. It was in the act of taking a story of fiction and forcing it to become a story of fact. The numbers didn't lie. I just had to make sure their voice was finally heard. My name is Celia, and I believe in the simple, powerful truth of a balanced ledger. Sometimes, a company's greatest asset isn't its cash flow or its market share. It's the one person in the back room who refuses to sign her name to a lie. So if you're out there, being pressured to bend, to fudge, to look the other way, don't. Your integrity is the one asset they can't take from you unless you give it away. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stand up and calmly present the bill. The bill for all the lies. Trust me, it always comes due. Thanks for listening. If you've ever had to stand up for the truth in a difficult situation, I'd be honored if you shared your story in the comments. Let's make this a place where facts matter. And don't forget to subscribe. The numbers, as always, tell a story, and there are many more to be told. See you next time.